On July 5, 1977, Sandra Mancy was standing near the northern end of Lake Champlain with her family when something broke the surface. She had no research vessel, no sonar, no reason to expect anything unusual. She was simply near the water, somewhere between St. Albans, Vermont, and the Canadian border. Then she saw what appeared to be a dark body rising offshore, with a long curved form extending above it. Mancy grabbed her camera and took one photograph. That single frame would become one of the most famous alleged lake monster photographs ever made. But what makes the image disturbing is not that it proves a monster lives in Lake Champlain. It does not. The problem is that the evidence needed to settle the question disappeared. Mancy did not preserve the original negative. She could not later identify the exact location where the photograph had been taken. Without the negative, investigators could not extract the maximum detail from the image. Without the location, they could not reliably establish distance, scale, or water depth. Skeptical investigators Benjamin Radford and Joe Nickel later argued that the object was probably a floating tree trunk or log. Other researchers remained unconvinced. Decades passed. The photograph remained. The certainty never arrived. And that is the pattern you are going to see again and again at Lake Champlain. Things appear, things sink, things are found years later. But just when the evidence seems ready to tell the whole story, part of the story is missing. Lake Champlain stretches about 120 miles from Whitehall, New York, north toward Quebec. At its widest, it spans roughly 12 miles. Its deepest point reaches about 400 feet, and the lake contains roughly 6.8 trillion gallons of water. More than 70 islands break its surface, while almost 600 miles of shoreline surround it. Beneath that surface is another landscape entirely. Cold, dark, fresh water slows decay. Silt covers wood, metal, tools, cargo, and sometimes entire vessels. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum says more than 300 shipwrecks are known in the lake. Some are identified, some are not. Some went down violently, others appear to have been deliberately abandoned, and several still contain details that archaeologists cannot fully explain. Quick second before we go deeper. If you like investigations where the strange part survives fact-checking, subscribe. It costs you one click, and it helps me keep digging into places like this without turning every unanswered question into a legend. Now back to the lake. The first mystery. The photograph cannot be finished. When Sandra Mancy raised her camera in 1977, she created the most famous modern piece of evidence connected to the creature people call Champ. The photograph appears to show a dark mass at the surface and a long, narrow shape rising above the water. Mancy said she watched the object before it disappeared. What followed was not a scientific confirmation, but a forensic problem. Researchers needed the negative. It was gone. They needed the exact site. Mancy could not relocate it. Philip Reiners, a nautical expert associated with the State University of New York at Plattsburgh, recognized that those missing pieces made reliable scale analysis extraordinarily difficult. Radford and Nickel later reconstructed the circumstances and concluded that a floating log or partially submerged tree offered a plausible explanation. The photograph itself showed no clear anatomical detail that forced an animal interpretation. And yet, the case refuses to die for a very simple reason. Nobody can return to July 5, 1977, place measuring instruments on the shoreline, determine the camera angle, calculate the object's distance, and test the original negative. The critical evidence is absent. No scale marker, no precise location, no negative, not a single surviving physical sample from whatever Mansi saw. That does not make the object a monster. It makes the case permanently incomplete. Imagine holding what looks like extraordinary evidence in your hands and realizing that the two pieces needed to evaluate it properly no longer exist. The professionals cannot identify the object with certainty because the data required for certainty disappeared with the moment itself. So what exactly surfaced in front of that family? The second mystery. An American warship vanished upright. In 1997, the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum survey team was scanning the bottom when sonar revealed the shape of a vessel sitting remarkably intact in deep water. The wreck stood upright. Its mast was still standing. A cannon remained at the bow. Researchers immediately understood that they were looking at one of Benedict Arnold's 1776 gunboats from the Battle of Valcour Island, but they did not know which one. 8 nearly identical 54-foot gunboats had been constructed at Skenesborough, present-day Whitehall, New York. Historical records explained the fates of most of them. This one had slipped through the documentary net. For 2 years, historians Art Cohn, Peter Barranco, J. Robert Maguire, George Quintal, and others compared surviving records and narrowed the wreck to either Connecticut or Spitfire. Then, in 1999, Connecticut historical book dealer John Townsend produced a document dated October 22, 1776. It listed the American fleet, the commanders, the weapons, and the fate of every vessel. Suddenly, the wreck had a name: Spitfire. It had gone down during Arnold's retreat after the October 11th battle and then remained standing in the darkness for more than 2 centuries. The identification was solved, but the ship itself remains an active research site. Its extraordinary preservation means archaeologists still have the possibility of finding details unavailable in surviving documents. The cold water kept the gunboat. History nearly lost its name. If a 54-foot warship could remain unaccounted for until 1997, upright beneath a heavily traveled American lake, what else is still standing down there? The third mystery. One wreck still has no country. In 1983, a Champlain Maritime Society team surveyed the bottom between Fort Ticonderoga and Mount Independence. They were searching for traces of the enormous bridge that had connected the 2 American positions during the Revolutionary War. Instead, the sonar and diver investigations revealed 3 18th-century shipwrecks. Archaeologists temporarily called them Hull Number 1, Hull Number 2, and Hull Number 3. Hull Number 2 was eventually identified as Boscawen, a British sloop constructed at Ticonderoga in 1759. Even in its deteriorated condition, it measured more than 70 feet long and had displaced about 115 tons. Excavation produced so many artifacts that work had to be slowed just to process them. More than 1,100 objects came from the first season, including rigging, shoes, buckles, gaming pieces, bottles, cannon shot, grenades, and gun parts. But Hull Number 3 did not cooperate. Archaeologists could not positively determine even its vessel type or national origin. Think about how strange that is. This is not an isolated timber. It is a ship from a period when France, Britain, colonial forces and later American armies fought repeatedly for control of this exact corridor. Researchers can identify construction traditions, artifact styles, and historical movements, yet this hull still lacks the documentary key that would connect it to a specific story. No confirmed name, no confirmed nation, no complete biography. It lies within one of the most intensively studied military landscapes in North America, and official archaeology still describes it as a mystery. Who built it? Who sailed it? And what happened on the day it reached the bottom? The fourth mystery. Horses once powered this wreck. In the fall of 1983, another side-scan sonar survey picked up a vessel in Burlington Bay. When archaeologists investigated, they found something almost vanished from North American transportation history: a horse-powered ferry. The wreck is 63 feet long and 23 feet wide, resting in about 50 feet of water. At its center are the remains of a horizontal flywheel and gearing system. Two large paddle wheels sit beside the hull. The machinery worked through animal power. Horses walked aboard the ferry, driving a turntable mechanism that transferred their movement through gears to the paddle wheels. Before steam became dominant, vessels like this carried people, wagons, and goods across rivers and lakes. The eerie part is not the technology, it is the missing identity. Lake Champlain's long shape made horse ferries practical, and their use peaked during the 1830s and 1840s. Yet this surviving vessel has no confirmed name and no confirmed construction date. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum describes it as the only archaeologically studied example of a turntable steamboat. That means one of the best physical records of an entire transportation technology is sitting in Burlington Bay, and researchers still cannot tell you exactly what it was called. Imagine descending through 50 feet of dark water and seeing oak spokes and iron hubs belonging to a machine that once moved because horses walked in circles above your head. The mechanism survives. The name does not. What records vanished that should have told us who built and operated it? The fifth mystery. The victim has a story, but the boat has no name. In 1982, researchers documented a canal sloop near Île-la-Motte. The wreck measured 79 feet 8 inches long and about 13 feet 6 inches wide. It sat bow down in soft sediment, listing to starboard. For years, archaeologists had the vessel, but not the event that destroyed it. Then researcher Peter Barranco found an 1846 newspaper report that seemed to fit. On the night of September 2nd, a man named Daniel Hall was carrying stone toward the new fort at Rouse's Point when a sudden squall hit his heavily loaded sloop. Hall tried to throw the anchor. The cable caught him. The vessel partially capsized, filled with water, and sank, dragging him down with it. His son and another man escaped. The timing, location, vessel type, and cargo all fit the wreck researchers had found. The probable tragedy emerged from a newspaper printed more than 150 years earlier. But the name of the vessel is still unknown. Archaeologists can place you almost inside the final minutes. A sudden wind, stone cargo, a man fighting an anchor line, a boat rolling underneath him. Yet the hull itself cannot provide the last piece. The stern cabin has not been fully excavated and may still contain portable artifacts. You can have the victim's name, the date, the likely sequence of the sinking, and the dimensions of the wreck, while the boat that carried him to his death remains anonymous. Tell me in the comments, which is stranger to you, a wreck with no story, or a story with no named wreck? The sixth mystery. A family disappeared from the paperwork. Near Sloop Island, divers encountered an intact standard canal boat resting about 90 feet underwater. Archaeological study in 2002 and 2003 showed that the vessel was approximately 97 feet long and 17.5 feet wide, a large boat from the final generation of Champlain Canal freight carriers. The cargo hold was still filled with bituminous coal from western Pennsylvania. But the cabin contained something more personal. Archaeologists recovered glassware, dishes, silverware, woodworking tools, and the wool coat. The collection indicated that a man, a woman, and at least one child had lived aboard the vessel. And then the record stops. Researchers believe the boat sank in distress around 1915. Its name is unknown. The exact circumstances are unknown. Imagine entering that cabin archaeologically, object by object. A plate, a coat, tools used by someone who expected to need them tomorrow. A household, frozen at the bottom of the lake. We have enough evidence to reconstruct the presence of a family, but not enough to attach their names to their possessions. The vessel still contains its windlass, anchor, deck lights and steering mechanism. A cable remains wrapped around portside cleats. The cabin roof lies beside the hull. Something happened quickly enough to put all of that underwater, but not clearly enough to survive in the historical record. Who are the people living there, and what happened in the last minutes before their floating home went dark? The seventh mystery. The lake kept the ship almost untouched. In December 1860, the schooner Sarah Ellen was crossing the broad lake during winter conditions, carrying a load of stone. The vessel sank in approximately 300 feet of water. More than a century later, in 1989, a sonar expedition located it in the darkness between the New York and Vermont shores. Researchers later sent a remotely operated vehicle down to the site. At that depth, sunlight is gone. The temperature remains cold. Biological decay happens slowly. The result was a shipwreck preserved with a level of detail that feels almost artificial. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum notes that because Sarah Ellen sank quickly, personal objects may still remain buried in the soft silt inside. Dishes, lamps, bottles, tools, clothing, bedding. The vessel has not been subjected to the repeated recreational diving that shallower wrecks experience. The museum's public description notes that after an ROV examination in 1992, the wreck had changed very little from its 1989 condition, and for years it was not revisited. That means entire compartments may still preserve information that no historian has seen directly. Archaeologists know the vessel. They know the year. They know where it lies. But they do not yet have every answer locked inside it. At 300 feet, even a routine examination becomes a major technical operation. The unsettling part is that the lake is not hiding Sarah Ellen metaphorically. It is physically holding unopened rooms in the dark. The eighth mystery. A burned ship lost its wheels for 201 years. On September 4, 1819, the steamboat Phoenix left Burlington for Plattsburgh, carrying 46 passengers and crew. Around 11 p.m., someone noticed an unusual glow near the amidships galley. Fire was already spreading through the wooden vessel. Passengers were awakened and pushed toward two small boats. In the confusion, about a dozen people, including Captain Richard Sherman, were left behind. Some survived in the water until morning. 6 died. For generations, the disaster was remembered, but the wreck itself disappeared after winter ice dragged the charred hull off Colchester Shoal. Divers rediscovered the hull in 1978. It was enormous, approximately 146 feet long and 27 feet wide, descending from about 60 feet at the bow to roughly 110 feet at the stern. but its two paddle wheels were missing. Researchers assumed they had separated during the fire. Then, in August 2020, local shipwreck researchers Gary and Ellen Lefebvre were working through thousands of sonar targets near Colchester Shoal when Gary noticed something strange more than 180 feet down. He lowered an ROV. On the screen appeared a huge circular structure with unmistakable charring. Lake Champlain Maritime Museum archaeologists identified it as one of Phoenix's paddle wheels. A second wheel was then located roughly 100 yards away. They had been lying about 3/4 of a mile from the main wreck. And even Phoenix still carries an unresolved question. The traditional explanation for the fire is a candle accidentally left burning in the pantry. Historical evidence has also raised the possibility that the fire was deliberately set amid intense commercial competition. The museum itself notes the competing possibilities. 200 years later, archaeology can show where the ship burned, where the wheels fell, and how the machinery was built. It cannot tell us who left that flame burning, or whether it was left there deliberately. The ninth mystery. A stone-filled boat has no past. Immediately off the southeast side of Diamond Island lies a wooden canal boat approximately 93 feet long and 14 feet wide. Divers can still see stacked blocks of quarried stone filling the wreck from one end to the other. Its stem rises about 8 feet above the lake bed. The vessel had no engine and no evidence of masts or sails. It had to be towed. Archaeologists call it the Diamond Island Stone Boat because they have nothing better to call it. Its real name is unknown. Its owner is unknown. The years it operated are unknown. Most disturbingly, the exact reason it sank is unknown. Investigators have developed two plausible scenarios. The boat may have broken away from a tow and drifted onto Diamond Island, or the tremendous weight of its stone cargo may have opened seams in the aging wooden hull, forcing the crew to run the vessel toward shore in an attempt to save it. Neither explanation has been proven. You can dive there today and see the cargo still sitting where 19th century workers stacked it. The evidence is physically present, yet the event that created the archaeological site left no confirmed narrative behind. No captain's account, no vessel name, no surviving report that closes the case. The stones have outlasted the people who moved them. The 10th mystery. This boat may belong to someone still remembered. In 2001, a side-scan sonar survey picked up a small object in deep water. Divers verified the target in November 2002. It was not a 19th century canal boat. It was a modern fiberglass sailboat, approximately 20 feet long. The cockpit remained visible. A small cabin sat forward. The aluminium mast was still standing. The mainsail remained furled on the boom. Researchers could find no engine, no name on the transom, and no registration number. Based on the wreck's condition, archaeologists concluded that the sinking was probably unintentional and had occurred only about 10 to 20 years before the survey. The absence of registration numbers was not necessarily suspicious, because Vermont did not require registration for vessels without motors. But that left researchers with a bizarre modern problem. They had the boat, apparently almost exactly as it had gone down, but no story. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum publicly asked anyone who knew the circumstances of its loss to contact them. Think about that. This is not a colonial vessel whose paperwork burned 2 centuries ago. It is fiberglass, aluminium mast, modern construction. Somebody bought it. Somebody sailed it. Somebody presumably knew it vanished. Yet when researchers found it upright in deep water, there was no name waiting for them. What happened on its last trip? And why did no surviving record immediately answer that question? The 11th mystery. The lake can turn toxic in plain sight. On July 7, 2026, scientists aboard the University of Vermont's research vessel Marcel Melosira moved south from Burlington toward Shelburne Bay. Research vessel specialist Eleanor Duver lowered a plankton net into the upper sunlit layer of the lake, pulled it back aboard, and carried the sample into the laboratory. Under magnification, the water became a moving community of organisms invisible from the deck. The researchers were studying a problem that has repeatedly closed beaches around Lake Champlain: cyanobacteria blooms. Cyanobacteria are native to the lake, and most of the time they are harmless at normal concentrations. The danger appears when conditions allow enormous colonies to form. Some species can produce toxins. Scientists know many of the major ingredients that favor blooms: excess phosphorus and nitrogen, warm water, calm conditions, shallow areas, and certain patterns of nutrient cycling. Missisquoi Bay has experienced particularly serious blooms, but the details are not simple enough to predict perfectly. Lake Champlain Basin Program scientists continue to monitor the lake, while current researchers study how weather, nutrients, lake bottom shape, water depth, and biological communities interact. In 2026, Vermont state limnologist Peter Isles described the problem as the product of numerous factors, rather than one simple trigger. Researchers are still trying to understand why one summer or one bay explodes with cyanobacteria, while another does not. That may be the most disturbing discovery on this list, because nobody has to dive 300 feet to encounter it. You can stand on the shore on a hot afternoon and watch the water develop green streaks, dots, clumps, or paint-like scum. The threat is biological, documented, and visible. Scientists can identify the organisms under a microscope. They can measure nutrients. They can close beaches. But predicting exactly when and where a dangerous bloom will develop remains an active research problem. The lake does not need a monster to make the surface unsafe. Sometimes, the most frightening thing in the water is something so small you need a microscope to see one cell. And this is why Lake Champlain feels different once you know what is actually under it. Not because every shadow is champ, not because every unexplained wreck requires a supernatural story. The truth is heavier than that. This lake is deep enough, cold enough, and historically important enough to preserve unfinished human stories for centuries. A gunboat can sit upright, with its cannon still aboard, while its name disappears from memory. A horse-powered ferry can keep its machinery and lose its identity. A family's dishes and clothing can survive while their names vanish. A burned steamboat can surrender 2 enormous paddle wheels after 200 years, then still refuse to tell us exactly why the fire began. A modern sailboat can sink with its mast standing and leave researchers asking the public if anyone knows whose boat it was. And right now, those things are still down there. Spitfire remains on the bottom. The horse ferry remains in Burlington Bay. The anonymous canal boats remain under the silt. Phoenix still carries the physical scars of the 1819 fire. The Diamond Island stone boat still holds its cargo. Sarah Ellen still sits in deep, cold darkness, with spaces archaeologists have not completely opened to history. Above them, researchers continue lowering instruments into the same water to understand a living lake that can change from clear to dangerous under the right summer conditions. Maybe that is what makes Lake Champlain genuinely terrifying. It does not simply hide objects, it preserves the evidence while removing just enough context to leave a question behind. A name disappears. A cause is uncertain. A photograph loses its negative. A family leaves its possessions, but not its identity. The lake gives us almost everything except the final sentence. So the next time you stand on the shore of Lake Champlain and look across calm water toward the Adirondacks or the Green Mountains, remember that the surface is only the newest layer of the story. Beneath it are centuries of unfinished ones. And if more than 300 wrecks have already been found, how many stories are still waiting in the darkness with no one alive who knows they are there? Tell me what you think and share this video with someone who would never look at Lake Champlain the same way again.